Good morning. Thank you for coming. I guess first and foremost in my love affair with Durham, I just want to say that one of the main reasons is that Durham shows up. So thank you so much for coming. So just a little bit about the process. I conceived of the project, but it's really not my project. This is very much a collaborative community process, and there have been many, many people involved. When I first conceived of the project, it was through learning about oral history, and then I took a class with Dr. Tim Tyson, Mary Williams, and Dr. Blair Kelly, and I'll say that class got me really fired up. But the one thing I knew about approaching the mural is that it was not my story to tell, so the idea was to gather Durham to tell its own story. We put out a call for participants. I got an overwhelming response, and we chose 30 folks. The youngest was 13 at the time, the oldest was 65, so it was an intergenerational, diverse group that we got together, and they went through the whole process with me. We did a series of lectures at Hayti Heritage Center that were free and open to the public. We had scholars, historians, veteran civil rights activists out to share with us, and then we did a lot of research. So I just really want to stress that this isn't about me as an artist. This is really about Durham getting together to tell its own story. Beyond that, there's been more than 100 other community volunteers who've come out to work on the project. So it's been pretty amazing participation. And I guess one thing I'd like to say about the process and collaboration, and want to stress about the importance of it, is having youth at the table. And so not just having youth at this table, but having youth at every table. I feel like some of the... if you understand the history, you understand that it was youth that made a lot of things happen. And some of the most creative problem solving that happened during the course of this project was from some of the youngest members of the group. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Thank you so much for coming.
Good morning. Truly, this is a wonderful day, and I agree with our County Library Director, Tammy Baggett. This is also an emotional day for the City of Durham because we have an opportunity to experience history here this morning. I want to thank our library staff for doing a phenomenal job in bringing this together. If you would also allow me to recognize one other elected official, Board of Education member Natalie Byer, I believe is present here. Hi, Natalie. Thank you. Let me thank all of you for joining us for this event today, all of our elected officials who are here. And on behalf of the Board of County Commissioners, it is certainly and indeed an honor to officially welcome our esteemed Congressman John Lewis to our great community. Congressman Lewis, I cannot tell you how humble we are that you consented to spend this entire weekend in Durham to participate in our Durham Reads Together kickoff weekend. Those of us who study history have come to revere and respect the work you began as a student organizer, one who led the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, including sit-ins and other activities during a pivotal time in our nation's history. The values, work ethic, and skills you honed during that time, working with Dr. King and other countless civil rights giants, have informed your lifelong work in the civil and human rights arena. We are grateful that you continue to toil on our behalf in such a selfless and effective manner, particularly serving in Congress. You should know that Durham is a community that has its own rich civil rights history. Leaders such as Floyd McKissick Sr., Reverend Douglas Moore, Dr. E. Lavonia Allison, I'm also glad to see Virginia Williams present today, others who are significant icons who spoke truth to power and led our residents to battle on the many fronts for equal rights. I am sure you have interacted with many of them as well. As I close, permit me to share with you an official resolution that was approved by the Board of County Commissioners in recognition of the special place that you occupy here in the history of our nation. Durham County Board of Commissioners Resolution, Congressman John Lewis, 2014. Whereas Congressman John Lewis is an American icon and a key figure in the civil rights movement. Whereas Congressman Lewis was born the son of sharecroppers on February 21st, 1940, outside of Troy, Alabama, and grew up on his family's farm and attended segregated public schools in Pike County, Alabama. Whereas as a young boy, he was inspired by the activism surrounded by the Montgomery bus boycott and the words of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And whereas as a young man, Congressman Lewis organized sit-in demonstrations at segregated lunch counters in Nashville, Tennessee, and participated in the Freedom Rides, which challenged segregation at interstate bus terminals across the South. Whereas he helped form and was named chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, better known as SNCC, which was largely responsible for organizing student activism in the movement, including sit-ins and other activities. Whereas Congressman Lewis was an architect and a keynote speaker at the historic March on Washington in August of 1963. And whereas he was elected to Congress in November 1986 and has served as a United States representative of Georgia's 5th Congressional District since then. Whereas Congressman Lewis is the co-author of the #1 New York Times best-selling graphic novel, memoir trilogy March, an important documentation of his lifelong struggle for civil and human rights. And whereas March has been selected for the Durham Reads Together 2014. Now therefore it be it resolved that we, the members of the Durham County Board of Commissioners, do hereby salute Congressman John Lewis for his commitment to justice and nonviolence. And we call upon all the citizens of Durham County to join us in reading March, Book 1, and discussing Durham's civil rights history as a community throughout the month of October. This, the 22nd day of September, this resolution was passed. Michael D. Page, Chairman, Brenda A. Howerton, Vice Chairman, Wendy Jacobs, Fred Foster Jr., and Ellen W. Reckow. Congratulations and thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Great to be here on this beautiful day and this beautiful occasion. I am especially happy, of course, to welcome my friend and colleague John Lewis to Durham, to the Triangle area. He's going to indeed spend the whole weekend with us, and we're going to have a great time. But this is a great way to start. And it's good to see all of you out this morning and to have this spirit to launch a significant weekend. And the library has done us all a service by focusing on reading, on educating our community, and on using our library to the fullest. And this is a library that does reach out to the community, and we're very, very appreciative of this event and the way it's been organized to include so many of us. John Lewis has been to Durham and to the Triangle many times, sometimes helping me out a little bit when I was in a tight spot. He's very familiar here, and we are very glad to welcome him back. John and I came to Congress at the same time. We were both in the class of 1986. It didn't take us too long, those of us in the class, when the TV cameras gathered around, it didn't take us too long to figure out it wasn't about us, but it was about John Lewis. And John was by far the best known member of our class, and he has distinguished himself from that day forward. He has been a leader in many legislative endeavors. He's had key positions in the Congress. He has been awarded this country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama. And just in so many ways has distinguished himself and all of us who are associated with him. The thing I want to say this morning, though, about this occasion and about John's visit here today is that one thing that I've observed about John that I think is very striking and speaks to what he regards his mission to be, his calling to be. John never tires of interpreting the civil rights movement and the ongoing struggle for freedom in this country. It doesn't surprise me at all that he produced this graphic novel as a new way to reach the new generation and many other people besides, of course, but especially to reach the new generation. John, for years, has led pilgrimages with the Faith and Politics Institute to the key locations of the Civil Rights Movement in Alabama and Mississippi. Lisa and I were privileged to go on one such mission. He will, when he's walking through the Capitol grounds and there's a school group and somebody recognizes him, John never hesitates to say hello and to say something about the kind of history that he represents. I don't believe he ever gets tired of that, and I hope he won't, because not only is he an absolutely central figure to this country's history of the struggle for dignity and justice and freedom for all people, but he is a gifted interpreter, as you will find out today if you don't know already. And that role of interpretation is one that is especially important now. I mean, we're at the 50-year mark. We've had the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer, and coming up, the 50th anniversary of Selma and of the Voting Rights Act. All of these times to reflect and rededicate ourselves. And there's no one in this country better able to help us do that, to guide us through that, than our friend John Lewis. So thank you for being part of this today. Thank you to the library for making this possible. And above all, thanks John Lewis for joining us and making this occasion so special.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Morning. Great.
I want to first thank all of you for being out here this morning on this beautiful fall day to support not only the Durham County Library, but to really provide a warm greeting to Congressman John Lewis. Can you give him a round of applause, please? This very, very distinguished gentleman is the last living icon of the Civil Rights Movement, and his start began right here in the Triangle, over on Shaw University's campus back in 1960 when he formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He's been active and involved ever since, out there principled, providing the type of character and leadership that we seldom see today. And I can remember as a child, right here in this area, growing up in Durham, looking out there on this very street behind us. It wasn't quite 50 years ago, but I saw 200 Klansmen walking down to 5 Points, trying to intimidate those that would stand up for their rights in this community. It wasn't that long ago, about 50 years ago, the Carolina Theater behind us only allowed blacks into the balcony, and my father filed that lawsuit to change that type of discrimination and bigotry in our community. And it's wonderful today to see a rainbow coalition of people from all across Durham and the Triangle coming here, providing living evidence of what the Civil Rights Movement did and how it impacted Durham and our community. That fundamental transformative change could not have occurred without the leadership of Congressman John Lewis and all the others that were part of that era. So I thank him for being here today. I thank him for passing on that legacy. I thank the Durham County Library for understanding that we need living tributes. We need to be able to share that vision, that journey from where we came to where we need to go, because while we have come so far, we still have a long way to go. We have not overcome today. And if the Tea Party conservatives and those who have taken control of North Carolina over the last 2 years have their way, they'll turn back the hands of time 50 years. That's not why we're here today. But stand up, speak out, be engaged, be a part of what's going on today. But more importantly, share that message, share that vision, and continue the dream.
Good morning. I am Congressman G.K. Butterfield, and along with Congressman David Price, we represent the County of Durham in the U.S. House of Representatives. Thank you very much for including us on your program today. How could I turn down an opportunity to be on the same stage with my good friend, John Robert Lewis?
a man that I have come to love and adore over the last 10 years that I have been in Congress. I first came to Durham in 1965. The Voting Rights Act had just passed a few days before I arrived on the campus of North Carolina College at Durham. It was a turning point in our history in this community. When I first came to Durham in 1965, there was one African-American elected official, Shaq Stewart, who served on the Durham City Council. We've come a long ways. I want you to know that. But when I came to Durham, I had already learned how to read and write in the public schools of my hometown of Wilson, but I want you to know that I got my education in Durham at North Carolina Central University. I got my civil rights education, if you will, on the streets of Durham. And so when Michael Page says that this is an emotional moment today, it is also an emotional moment for me because I marched in the streets of Durham many, many times while I was a student at North Carolina Central University. Let me, as I introduce, and Michael, Commissioner Page went into a lot of detail, and I dare not repeat all of that because that's not the way you do introductions. Michael has set out very well what the Congressman is all about, but let me give it to you in a little different perspective, and then I will take my seat. We all know that in 1964, the Civil Rights Bill was enacted into law. But what many of us may not know is the backstory to the 1964 Civil Rights Bill. When John F. Kennedy ran for president in 1960, he said to Black America, to African Americans who lived in the North who were registered to vote, and to the few who lived in the South who were registered to vote, elect me president. Elect me, John F. Kennedy, president, and if you would do that, I will make sure that America will get a strong civil rights bill. President Eisenhower had tried it in 1957 and it didn't work. Kennedy said, elect me and I will make it happen. And the African-American community believed in President John F. Kennedy and helped catapult him to the White House. He was sworn into office January 20th, 1961, no civil rights bill. 1962 came, no civil rights bill. And by this time, the 6 black civil rights leaders in this country, including the youngest one, John Robert Lewis, became very agitated that the president was reluctant to put forth a civil rights bill, and they went to the White House and met with President Kennedy, and President Kennedy said, yes, I still believe in strong civil rights, but I've got to deal with Cuba, I've got to deal with Khrushchev, I've got to deal with the race to the moon, I've got the war on poverty that I want to roll out, and we are going to get around to civil rights, but now is not the time. And that's when John Lewis and Floyd McKissick and Roy Wilkins and Whitney Young and A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin and other African-American leaders assembled together and said, we are going to demonstrate to President Kennedy that the time is now for a civil rights bill. And this was the youngest of the 6. And they organized the massive 1963 March on Washington that all of you know so very well. John Lewis is the last survivor of the speakers that day who spoke at the monument at the March on Washington. A few days before the march took place, President Kennedy summoned this man to the Oval Office. He summoned the other leaders and said, I get it. I understand what you're saying. I understand the urgency. If you would just work with me, I'll go ahead and introduce the Civil Rights Bill and get this thing moving. And these 6 men retired to the upper room and they looked at each other and they tried to figure out, well, if we call off the march and the president doesn't do it and doesn't get it passed, we will look insignificant as leaders. However, if we go on with the march and there's a huge backlash among white Democratic Southern senators, we may not get this thing passed at all. And so they were in an intractable dilemma. And I am told that this man was advocating in all of those meetings that we go forward, that we go forward with the August 28, 1963 March on Washington, and I'm so glad that he did. After the March on Washington made the statement that it did, and the 4 little girls were bombed in Alabama and all of that trauma, and after John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, after all of that happened, President Johnson became president of the United States because he was vice president. And President Johnson called Lewis and King and others to the White House and said, "We want to thank you for your work on civil rights." And the story is told that the leaders then turned to President Johnson and said, "President Johnson, now, sir, it's time for a Voting Rights Act." President Johnson said, "I understand what you're saying, but I'm from the South. I have lost friends over the Civil Rights Bill that we just got passed, that President Kennedy started. I cannot go forward right now with a voting rights bill. I understand what you're saying." And John Lewis and King and others said, "But you don't understand. Black people in Durham and Raleigh and Greenville and Greensboro, they have the literacy test and they have other devices that are keeping them from voting. We need to be able to bring lawsuits so that we can break up these at-large multi-member districts. We need a Voting Rights Act." And Lyndon Johnson said, "I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I'm not going to do it." This man and others left the White House, went back to Atlanta for Christmas. They were very disenchanted, very disappointed with the president. And in January of 1965, they started a brand new movement. Tell your children that there's a difference between the civil rights movement and the voting rights movement. They started a brand new movement in the South. This time it was a voting rights movement. And who stepped to the forefront of the voting rights movement was not just Martin Luther King Jr., but it was John Lewis as well. John Lewis was the head of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was the young movement of the day. But after that, he became the chairman of the Voter Education Project that we should know so much about here in Durham. And because of John Lewis's work in the Selma to Montgomery, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and I've been with John to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. One of the most cherished pictures in my office is standing with him on the bridge. But because of that march, that massive march to Montgomery, President Johnson changed his mind, went on television March 15th, 1965, was it? And looked in the camera and said, "We are going to have a Voting Rights Act in this country. It might do significant damage to the Democratic Party, but we're going to have a Voting Rights Act." And the Voting Rights Act eventually passed in August of 1965, and that's why we see hundreds of black elected officials serving all over North Carolina doing great work. And I just want to publicly thank John Lewis for the bold stand that he took during the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Movement. I really didn't know John Lewis before I got elected to Congress. Like many of you, I saw him from a distance. I would see him at public gatherings, shake his hands, but he didn't know me from anyone. But I have really gotten to know him over the last 10 years. We are friends, we are brothers, we are colleagues. There's not a day goes by that we don't sit together, talk together on the House floor, and talk about the future of our community. John Lewis is a legend. David Price is right. He will not walk back to his office in the tunnel. He insists on stepping down the steps and walking across the street and meeting the tourists who come to the Capitol. Finally, I will tell you one final story, and then I will introduce or present John Lewis to you. But do you remember when Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, was being debated?
Yes.
And we all thought it was going to pass rather easily, and we went home for the August recess to find the Tea Party waiting for us at home. And they organized by the tens of thousands, and they were well financed and well organized, and we're seeing it right now this year, and I ain't going political on y'all today. But the Tea Party organized, and they came to Washington, And we walked out on the balcony of the Capitol and we could see nothing but thousands of Tea Party protesters standing there waiting for us to walk off of the House floor. The Capitol Police rushed over to us and said, Congressman, don't go outside. Your life could be in danger. Want you to go down the steps and into the tunnel and back over to your office buildings. And this man, against the advice of his chief of staff and my chief of staff, but those of us who serve in Congress who came out of the struggle, we understood. We said, let's do it. And we walked right through the Tea Party, walked back to our office, and now we have the Affordable Care Act. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Congressman John Lewis. God bless you, John Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those kind words of introduction. David, Floyd, Chairman, Mr. Commissioner, Floyd, Member Library. I'm so moved, I'm so touched to be here with my co-writer, Andrew Aydin, to be here with each and every one of you. My late wife was a librarian. Yeah. She loved books, read all the time. When I was dating her, she said she was going to get my papers in order. She was going to collect all of my books and put them in order. And I kept on telling her, get my papers in order, get my books in order. And I fell in love with books, with library. I tell you, give you just a little story. I'm so moved to be here. In 1956, when I was 16 years old, I've been so inspired by Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. With some of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we went down to the public library in a little town of Troy, Alabama, trying to get library cards, trying to check out some books. And we were told by the librarian that the libraries are whites only and not for coloreds. I never went back to that library, to that building, until July 5th, 1998, for a book signing of my book, Walking with the Wind. And hundreds of blacks and white citizens showed up. Signed a lot of books, had a wonderful reception. End of the reception, they gave me a library card. It says something about the distance we've come and the progress we've made. And to see this rainbow, to see you here in downtown Durham, here in the heart of North Carolina, standing together, reading together, March, Book 1. You make me feel good. You're a beautiful group. Handsome, just good looking. To see all these young people, all these children, I know they're going to grow up and be smart because they're going to read. I had a wonderful teacher when I was in elementary school, in a very poor, overcrowded school, who told me, read, my child, read. And I tried to read everything, everything. We didn't have that many books, but I tried to read every book. We were too poor to have a subscription to the local newspaper, but my grandfather had a subscription. And when he would finish reading his newspaper each day, we would get his newspaper and read it. So I said to you young people, to you children, and to those of us not so young but a little older, read. I know in this day of the new technology, but it's nothing like holding a book in your hand. Holding that book and reading that book. So, guys, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, for being on this journey with me. Madam Librarian, thank you for inviting us to come. Now, growing up there in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, outside of that little place called Troy, you heard in the introduction, maybe from the chairman of the county commission, that I'm the son of a sharecropper. I remember very well growing up. But in 1944, at the age of 4, and I remember when I was 4. How many of you remember when you were 4? That's very good. What happened to the rest of us? My father had saved $300, and with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. My family still owns this land today. We raise a lot of cotton and corn, peanuts, hogs, and cows and chickens. I won't tell you the full story of the chickens, but those of you that are reading March, you know that I wanted to be a minister. And from time to time, with the help of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken yard, like you're gathered here. And the chickens, along with my brothers and sisters and cousins, would help make up the audience, the congregation. And I would start speaking or preaching, and when I look back on it, some of these chickens would bow their heads. Some of these chickens would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But I am convinced that some of those chickens that I preached to in the 40s and the 50s tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listen to me today in the Congress. And some of those chickens were just a little more productive. At least they produce eggs. But I tell you, you're more than blessed. You're more than lucky to have these two unbelievable members of Congress. To have Congressman David Price and Congressman Butterfield. Sometimes I look up at the board and see how they are voting. And I follow their leadership. I'm honored to be in your presence today. And I want to thank each and all of the elected officials for being here. Well, I got to know your father very well. If you come to Washington and visit my office, you will see a photograph on the wall, framed in the Oval Office with President Johnson, the day of the March on Washington. Your father and others made a lasting contribution. America is a different America. Our country is a better country. If someone had told me back in 1940 when I was born, or told me in 1960 when I started sitting in, or 61 going on a freedom ride, or 1964 when the Civil Rights Act was passed. If someone had told me when I walked across that bridge on Bloody Sunday in Selma, beaten, left bloody and unconscious, that one day that I would live to see a man of color become president of the United States. I would say, you don't know what you're talking about. So when people tell me nothing has changed, I just feel like saying, come and walk in my shoes. March Book 1 is saying, in effect, that we must never, ever give up, or give in, or give out. We must keep the faith, hold on to our dreams, and to say to our young people, you too can find a way to get in the way. When I was growing up and would ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents about those signs that said white waiting, white men, colored men, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But Rosa Parks and Dr. King and others, the Little Rock Nine, inspired me to find a way to get in trouble. Good trouble, necessary trouble. And I hope, and Andrew hope, that Book March, Book 1, Book 2, be out next January. Book 3 will be out in 2016. Would inspire another generation of young people to stand up, to speak up, to speak out, and find a way to help make our country and help make our world, this little piece of real estate, a little better. We have an obligation and a mission to leave this little planet a little cleaner, a little greener, and a little more peaceful. To see the young people demonstrating today in Hong Kong, carrying signs saying no violence. The way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence is a better way. So you see marching feet on Book 1, when Book 2 come out next year. It will be an image of the burning of the bus, the Greyhound bus, that came through North Carolina, through South Carolina, through Georgia, through Alabama, through Mississippi, where we were arrested in jail. We tell the story of the movement, not just for this generation, but for generation yet unborn. So people all over America are reading the book. One book, one community. Durham Read. 8,500 freshman students are reading the book at the university, Michigan State University. 3,500 freshman students are reading at Georgia State University. 2,000 students, freshman students at Marquette are reading as required reading. And hundreds and thousands of other students are reading in elementary school, middle school, high school, and college. So Durham, you're not alone. Thank you for reading March. Madam Library, could I yield to Andrew for a moment? A little of my time. Andrew Aydin.
I don't know how you follow that, except to say that my name is Andrew Aydin and I am not running for anything. Listen, this started because Congressman Lewis told me about a comic book called Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story. And it was used right here in North Carolina to inspire some of the earliest sit-ins. Right? When Dr. King went to see LBJ in the fall and the winter of 1964 after accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, he said, we need a Voting Rights Act. But what LBJ said to him is, we just passed the Civil Rights Act. We don't have the votes in Congress. Something we hear a lot today, right? Well, what LBJ said is, if you want that act, you have to make me do it. Make me sign it. Make Congress pass it. And we are taking Dr. King's idea, because he edited that comic book. And we've developed our own. And we're taking it across this country to give it to young people. You guys. So that you'll make Congress pass the legislation we need and change this country. Right? We didn't know this would work. But just before the book came out, we got a call from a reporter at a very conservative newspaper that shall remain nameless. And he said, I don't usually do this, but I liked your book so much, I gave it to my 9-year-old son. And he's put on his Sunday suit, and now he's marching around my house, demanding equality for everyone. It's on their shoulders, all right? That's the only way we're going to change this country. And they have to take up nonviolence, as we're seeing happen all across the world now. Whether it's in Hong Kong or Ferguson, disciplined, orderly, nonviolent protest is the only thing that will work. That's what we're trying to do, trying to find those young people who will step up and fight. That's why we're here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. Let's march through the streets of Durham. Thank you very much.
Wow, all of these are hard acts to follow. I'd like to thank everyone for their comments today. I'd like to thank Congressman Lewis for your inspirational words. And I have recently learned that the cover of March was inspired by Martin Luther King. And in that, I want to paraphrase something of Dr. King. There is no sound more powerful than the marching feet of a determined people. I want to encourage you now to join me as we're led back by the police, that we march back with Congressman Lewis as a determined people, and that we recognize this day in history here in Durham County and all the great things that we have done and all of the great things to come. Thank you. Join me as we march back.